may distribute campaign literature and materials, but it cannot disrupt the flow and flow of traffic or with instruction or the flow of traffic in the hallways. Also, if the board approves the policy as written, high school students, grades 9 through 12, would have the opportunity to participate in the election process and miss up to 3 school days, and those school days would be excused absences as long as the procedures are followed. And that time frame for that would be during the 4 weeks prior to a primary or general election. Also, in the third bullet on this slide 7, I'll be considering adding or rewording a paragraph in the policy, paragraph 3C, based on feedback from the ACLU. That policy or that language is regarding the ability of students to have free expression as long as it doesn't disrupt the school setting. So feedback from the ACLU was to clarify that language and make it more consistent with the Supreme Court Tinker versus Des Moines case. So I'll be taking a look at that and maybe doing some wordsmithing. Also, the last bullet on this slide, regarding the students' participation in political campaigns, feedback from the ACLU, they found the idea of an excused absence to be great, but they also wondered about the purpose of the limiting that participation to the 4-week window prior to the primary and general election, and they were wondering what purpose does that serve, and said that some students might want to use that opportunity much more prior to the election, outside that 4-week window. So that's something for the board and the administration to consider. This next slide shows what some of the other jurisdictions do with regard to students participating in political campaigns. As you can see, most of the other ones are limited to 11th and 12th grade students. When this policy, JJL, was first drafted and we shared it with the Office of Teaching and Learning, they recommended making that opportunity available to students in grades 9 through 12. Also, most of these other jurisdictions limit the days that this is available to 3 to 5. Ours is 3. And as far as the issue that the ACLU identified regarding that 4-week window prior to the election, Calvert County, as you can see, they're silent, as well as is Carroll County on that issue. Cecil County makes it available for the 10 school days immediately preceding the election. Caroline County limits it to just Thursday, Friday, Monday before an election, and Montgomery County opens it up to the 2 weeks prior to. Going a little bit into the administrative regulation. Student-led clubs of a political nature are acceptable, and they may utilize school facilities just like other non-curricular clubs. Opportunities offered to students by the school must be fair. So one example that the district has faced in the past is we had a high school where a bus trip to a campaign, a presidential candidate's speech was offered to the Democratic Club. So some kind of comparable opportunity would have to be offered to any other clubs that were at the school. With regard to student participation in political campaigns, the regulation requires, again, that it's available or indicates that it's available to students in grades 9 through 12, that the principal may excuse the student for up to 3 days for that participation, that the student has to submit some kind of work product upon completion, and if it's approved by the designated staff at the school, the activity could count towards the student's service learning requirements. Some additional details: the principal is the one that makes the decision as to whether or not the student can participate, and that decision has to be nonpartisan. The request made to the principal has to be submitted and signed by the parent or guardian. The ACLU pointed out that in the policy, there's a disconnect in the policy. It says that it can be requested by the student, parent, or guardian, and they also pointed out that some students might be emancipated, so we'll have to clarify the language in that situation. And Also, the request has to show some kind of evidence as to how and when the student services will be utilized by the candidate or the campaign, and also that the principal can refuse the request if the principal determines that it would be a negative or have a negative impact on the student's educational progress. And that's it.
All right, thank you very much. I'll start us off with a philosophical question, and then open it up. So one of the things in either of the policies, political activity is not defined. And so fundamentally that might be a starting place. Through many of the regulations you read, it's fairly tight that it's about campaign for elected office and supporting that. But I think about like recently the Black Lives Matter in the schools movement very much could be considered a political activity and would run counter to many of these regulations, yet they're things we want to encourage kids to be engaged in. So from a philosophical level, do you want us to interpret this as just political campaigning for an elected office? Or is it political activity, both lower and capital letter P?
My answer to that question would be both, because when I sent the materials to the ACLU, I actually invited them to provide comments on how they thought or how they would look at the policy or handle students doing the organized walkouts for the student safety issue. Unfortunately, they didn't provide any feedback on that. But yes, I believe that these could be expanded to cover both types of situations.
So I think there might be some need for some attention to some language around that. The 17 minutes is okay. Well, can I use one of my days if I take 19 minutes? Some of those things that might become very fuzzy once we start solidifying these. So with that, I'll open it up to the two of you before I run through my laundry list. Questions at this point?
The lady.
No.
I just want to piggyback off of what you said. I think that we need to clearly define or specify political activity versus campaigning. I think that they can be two different things because that is the exact same thought that came in my mind. The Black Lives Matter movement, it is not a campaign for a particular candidate. I also have a concern with a couple of things. With the GBI, with the staff, I think that and I know that we're reviewing it, I think that number 12 is excessive. Any display of personal political paraphernalia on one's desk or in one's office must be exercised in a manner that minimizes influencing students, especially those of impressionable age. Impressionable age raises a question for me because should we specify what an impressionable age is? And we're talking about 11th and 12th graders, but you have students that are younger than that are also involved in community organizations and things like that. So it's a concern for me, but I do think 12 is a bit excessive because if I have a picture of President Obama in my room, my office space, or on my desk, would that be considered a political activity or political paraphernalia? I mean, he was the president, but he's no longer the president, but I don't know, he's a part of history. It's just, I think 12 is a lot to ask for a person. So are we defining political paraphernalia? Could be the NRA, or is it a campaign for a person or a particular cause? I think should be defined in the policy.
Okay. Yeah, I think the idea here too is kind of, for lack of a better phrase, like a sliding scale. The idea that the younger the student, the more impressionable they are and the more difficulty they might have in seeing something on a teacher's desk and understanding that it's there to try to influence the student, which a younger child might think, versus somebody who's in 10th, 11th, or 12th grade who understands that that's just, that picture is there, or that sticker is there, that phrase or sign is there just because it's the teacher, the teacher's favorite phrase of the week, whatever.
With this issue, one might argue that it actually might even almost be reversed, that a 5 or 6 year old would not attend to or care, but someone who's approaching a voting age might be more impressionable. So I think the age limit, I think, is problematic. I think if we're going to do a policy, it should be uniform. Either you're not allowed to have political symbolism on your desk, or your desk is your space, treat it with conscientious educator lenses.
I have another question. What happens if this is violated? What happens if one of these rules are broken? I think that there should be some language in the policy to address that, because it's not here. But I do think that schools should be a place where discussion around political activity, or I think that we should be having those types of conversations, and I appreciate the language that is in here already, which kind of guides teachers to be the facilitator of discussion versus having a biased opinion about a campaign or political activity. But I'm also torn on the definition, the political activity or campaigning in regards to this policy, because in Part B, number 1, state law prohibits board employees from engaging in political activity while on the job during working hours. State law also prohibits board employees from advocating the overthrow of the government by unconstitutional or violent means. So this is the law, right? And everything outside of that is us figuring out or determining how we're going to operate with this law, right? So I don't know, I just feel that philosophically there are a lot of restrictions that this does impose, and I guess it's just something that we'll work through while it goes through readers.
So specifically, as long as Commissioner McFadden brought it up, under GBI, Roman numeral 3 policy standards, letter D states nothing in this policy should be constructed to mean that employees are restricted from conversing with colleagues about political topics during breaks, lunches, outside the presence of students. Again, it comes to a philosophical level, but all education is political. So then where comes in the role of modeling constructive disagreement, of being able to model civic engagement? Just the idea we can't talk because there's a child that might hear, when in case that young person might very much benefit from learning how people disagree in civil society and how you discuss ideas in civil society. So I'm not sure a policy forbidding sort of civil society discussions is productive for what we really want to empower our young people with agency and engagement.
I think that's something different from political activity also.
Right. And that, again, comes to possibly if the definition of political activity is more clearly defined, that part might solve itself.
Yeah, I think to my mind, it's almost like a slippery slope. As far as modeling, staff, teachers could certainly do that by example, but just making it not a political nature, having it be some other topic. And again, political activity will have to be defined, but I think we would be better off if that restriction stays in place. And if they do want to model that constructive dialogue, the give and take, it should be something that's not political in nature.
I'm still on the slides of here. I'm on the 5th slide. And I think we've already had a discussion about it, but I just want to voice my opinion. The part with the bottom line, which says display of political paraphernalia on the desk or in the office must be exercised in matter, where it says minimize influencing students. I think you just brought that up. That's so subjective.
The statement's based on case law, so, I can come back to the first reading with additional information there, or, additional background information.
I think that this will have to, so many directions it could go in, that I think that we really need to evaluate it a little bit more, this policy. because so many things going on in the world right now that is so subjective, and I don't know how we can. I know you said it's in the law, but minimize influence in students is a concern of mine right now. And how do you do that? You know.
Are there any guidelines within union contracts that speak to political affiliation or activity? For example, any of the unions that we have, do they already have any language within their contracts, do we know of, that talks about political activity or campaigning or endorsing?
I believe that there are some statements regarding political leave, but beyond that, I'm not sure. I'll double check.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to Tanisha. we'll be able to fit you in. I'd rather fit you in than have you speaking from the gallery, so we don't have you on the record.
My point for asking that is, if there is language already in contracts, do we need a policy for staff? I can understand having some direction for students, but if there is already language written in for unions and what they can and cannot do, thank you. Is it redundant, and should we draft a policy because other districts are doing it, and it's important, not that it's not important, but do we already have that language? I can understand it for the students, but if there's already some guidance for staff members within their union or their contractual agreements, is it redundant? Yes.
So, good afternoon. The union contracts do not speak comprehensively about employee political activity. And one of the reasons we selected or recommended that this particular policy come before the committee and subsequently the board is based on the number of inquiries that we get whenever there is an election at foot. And so we often get calls from principals referencing what materials or what paraphernalia can a teacher wear. Bumper stickers in the car. Can they say certain things to students? How does it interplay with academic freedom versus the limited First Amendment rights that a governmental employee has, especially when that individual's role is that of a role model for kids who are still developing? And so, to Sally's point, many of the recommendations that are made in the policy are based strictly on case law. And this is a subject matter that I think many school systems throughout the nation struggle with from time to time, but teachers are of great influence to kids. And if it's as simple as a picture of a former president being displayed, that leads to a discussion at home, which leads to a complaint by a parent regarding whether a teacher supported President Bush or President Obama or President Trump. So the attempt of this policy is to make sure that to the extent that political materials and subject matters are addressed, it's done so in an impartial way. When we talk about one of the commissioners' suggestion that perhaps this is an opportunity for students to observe an engagement and a difference of opinions by adults being displayed in a respectful manner, that's true. But it also advocates for one position over the other. And as a government employee, that sort of behavior is prohibited.
Okay. I have a few pieces. One, when you talk about the expression of political views, the definition between the two policies is different under symbolic political expression. In the GBI, it says the expression of political views through nonverbal means such as wearing a political button or armband. In the student one, it adds the word T-shirt. So I just think that needs to be consistent. And
Well,
ideally, teachers should also know that that not just buttons and armbands, but T-shirts count too.
Okay, we'll look at it, but the First Amendment rights of students and teachers are different.
Correct.
Okay.
But we should be consistent in the definition of what we're calling symbolic representation of political action. Should we not?
Well, so it would be problematic for a teacher to wear a T-shirt.
Right,
is
and it
not
doesn't say
prob-
that in the teacher one.
Right,
It
but it-
does say that in the student one.
It is not problematic for a student to wear a
Correct.
T-shirt.
That's why it's a challenge, because it says it in the student one and it doesn't say it in the teacher one.
Okay, so you
That's
want us to
prohibited.
affirmatively state that a teacher should not wear a T-shirt?
Correct.
Okay,
Okay.
okay.
Yeah, that's, yeah, especially if we're going to include it with the student one.
Okay.
Because the student one actually might not be supposed to be there.
To your point, Tammy, I think
Okay.
it's it's reversed.
Yeah.
It should-
Okay.
Yeah.
Students should be allowed to wear T-shirts.
Okay.
Correct.
And
Yeah, it's-
teachers should not be allowed to
Thank
wear
you.
Correct.
T-shirts.
Yeah,
I
it's-
think is what you're saying.
One other wordsmithing piece, and this is just so that we look educated when we send it out. Oh, two pieces. One, in your preamble, you might want to mention simply that we are an academic institution, and that's our primary. So when political activities are appropriate to academic engagement, but if they're not, be avoided. But the other piece about just wordsmithing is under GBI, Roman numeral number 3, policy standards, letter A. The statement says, board employees share full equity, or full equality with other citizens in exercise of public rights and responsibilities. I think the word exercise needs to have a tense change or something.
Okay.
In the exercise or in exercising. It's a silly one, but might as well
That's
have it. Correct. Also, under Roman numeral 3, letter B, it states that the board advises that employees have responsibility to refrain from involvement in political activities while on the job during work hours. If it's a policy, it's more than just a responsibility to refrain. So I'm just wondering if the strength of language, the board advises employees to refrain from, rather than, it just feels a little like, well, I didn't really feel like exercising that responsibility today, so I did it different. So we might want to just look at the language there. We already talked about letter D. In letter H, under that same Roman numeral 3 policy standards, it states that volunteers are encouraged to refrain from engaging in political activity that may interfere with the performance of their volunteer activities. Again, it seems really swishy and soft. Volunteers are to refrain, period, end of subject, not comma, if that's what we're going to do with this policy. But not encouraged to refrain. Because that way, it gives a principal no leverage to go in and say, you can no longer volunteer, because they say, well, I was just only encouraged. There's a few pieces that I'm concerned might be missing in it, and one of them is, what about school mock elections?
I'm sorry?
School mock elections, are they always unbiased? There's nothing in about can they happen, should they happen, if they happen school-wide, are they, it just feels like that was a chunk that might be missing. And also the use of schools, school staff or students in political ads, campaign announcements. Even if I just decide I'm Martha Hassan running for Queen of the Universe, and I decide to take a picture in front of North Avenue. Is that okay? Is that not okay? Do they need permission, even though it's a public space, public building? So I don't know the law around that.
Yeah, some of that information is in the public use of school facilities.
Okay.
But I can make sure that there's an appropriate
Or-
cross-reference and make sure that
crosswalk.
any gaps that might exist are filled in.
Yeah, because if I'm looking at, I'm going to run an election, I might not go to this. I might go to, I
Right.
wouldn't go to necessarily the building use. So anyway, it's something to consider. Under the regulations for GBI, letter A, Roman numeral 1, letter A, number 2, again stating specifically what symbolic means. And it says limited to outside the classroom and or off school grounds. We might want to consider simply off school grounds, because as soon as you say outside of the classroom or off school grounds, well, I was in the cafeteria. Just making it more streamlined, this is not welcome on school grounds, period. That includes everywhere. Also in Roman numeral 1.
Well,
under
if I can just clarify.
Yes, absolutely.
Because a teacher would have a right to have a political discussion in a teacher's lounge with a colleague
Outside the presence of students.
outside the presence of students. And so that is on school grounds, or would be on
That's
school
true.
grounds.
Okay. Well, we could add that language then, just to say outside of the classroom or off-school grounds, again, makes it fuzzy and hard to enforce. But yes, your change makes total sense. Roman numeral 1, letter B, number 4, where it says political science or current events, so political activity can be used in schools if in a political science class or for current events. I ask that you consider changing that to in conjunction with standards-based instruction and district-adopted curriculum instead of political science or current events, because there may be other courses. An English class might want to write an essay. Boom, now they're not included. A social studies class might want to dig in. They're not necessarily studying political science, but they want to look at history. I know that, in my physical education class, we talked about, when we taught baseball, we talked about the immigration patterns of Central American baseball players, which is very much a political conversation, not in a political science class. I'm sure you tag in things around history and politics in your class all the time as well.
Today we did.
Very nice, very nice. Then my other comments are on JJL, and I don't want to overwhelm you with too many things too quickly. Again, the definition, either consistent or not consistent in those. Under Roman numeral number 3, letter B, participation in extracurricular political clubs or other student-led activities shall be voluntary. And also throughout the policy and the regulations, it states very clearly that students can organize. Do we need to enumerate a statement prohibiting the participation in political groups that are not recognized as hate groups? If we say students can organize a political organization in school, could they organize a neo-Nazi group and we have to support that, for example?
So I was going to be adding some language I mentioned earlier, to clarify the role of teacher advisors to make sure that it's compliant or consistent with the Equal Access Act. So the Equal Access Act also touches upon that issue, so I can add additional language about
I think it
that.
might be really helpful to have that proactively in place. And then the other piece about the student groups is with their advisors, and I'm glad that you flagged that. If I'm a teacher and I'm not supposed to talk about politics, but I'm now the advisor for the Young Republicans of Dunbar, can I engage in that context?
Right.
In
Not talk
political
about
conversation?
politics in a partisan manner.
But I could if I'm the advisor of the Young Republicans, could I not?
Well,
No.
no, you can't
No.
really.
So I have to sit in a meeting with 25 young people and say, you really should consider being Democrats also.
So
Yeah.
you're
So-
there to keep the peace for the most part.
Yep. So the Equal Access Act is very specific that teacher, employee advisors, their basic role is to sit there and make sure that discipline is maintained. They can't participate, they can't sponsor, they can't lead.
Okay. What if
And that's for
the advisor is a
non-curricular groups.
non-staff member advisor? So it's an
That
adult
can't-
volunteer.
That can't, under the Equal Access Act, that would be prohibited.
Okay, so then that makes even more reason to tighten up the volunteer language.
Agreed.
Okay,
And
perfect.
we should probably put
Those are all my big giant ones.
You hit 'em.
Yeah. Anything else?
You leave
Commissioner
anything out?
Fadden? Commissioner Bodema, anything?
No, I'm good.
Allison, anything? Okay. All right, as with all policies, tons of work obviously goes in. This one gets an even bigger legal crosswalk, so appreciate the effort and everything you've put in. Thank you very much. We have one member of the public, who's here to speak with us. So once you get tidied up, we'll invite Christina Duncan Evans to come to the table.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Sally.
Yes, much appreciated.
Hi,
Hi.
my name is Christina Duncan Evans, and I am speaking as a member of the steering committee of the Baltimore Movement of Rank and File Educators, which I organize on my private time.
Christina, can you say the name of your group again?
The Baltimore Movement of Rank and File Educators.
Thank you.
I was looking at this policy and I have some questions and suggestions. I would echo the point about definitions. Political activity extends beyond a particular election cycle, and I think a clarification that political activity is not tied to an election cycle is really helpful. I think that it would be helpful to me in this particular moment to understand how teachers and staff members interact with the board as private citizens, as employees, because some of the issues that we bring to the board in public comment and in other forms are political in their nature. So I would ask that the policy also kind of talk about the interactions among adults. Number two, given the nature of many political issues as existing outside of the election cycle, 4 weeks does seem arbitrary. If, for instance, there was an extension of the Muslim ban and the ACLU was organizing students to door knock to call congressmen, that would happen outside of a 4-week window. But I feel like that was raised earlier, so I just want to echo that. My third point is, or what, right? Like you're saying that people can't do things, or what? And that's a really important thing for people in political activity to know, because one of the principles of civil disobedience is you have to know the consequence and then decide if it's a big enough issue for you to accept the consequence willingly. And so I think it would be really helpful to outline what is the consequence so that we can make that informed decision. I think that this will come up again next February when we do our first annual Black Lives Matter Week of Action. We did our inaugural one this year when 257 teachers, by our count, wore Black Lives Matter t-shirts to school. And next year we expect 750 to 1,000 to participate by wearing a t-shirt. So if t-shirts are explicitly banned, just giving you a heads up that that's going to happen regardless. And lastly, disobedience is separate from civil disobedience. And a consequence that happens as a result of political activity should not trigger another offense of insubordination. Because when a person is engaging in political activity, it's not about you, right? It's not about the rules that the board is setting. It's about the larger issue. And so to add another charge of insubordination is a really authoritarian move that would be inconsistent with a lot of the things that I've heard said here this afternoon. So thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. So maybe we could look into if there's like a double jeopardy kind of a clause we could add or statement. Another thing that I thought of that I forgot on my list, Tammy, if you want to say something, is about union elections. So when the union is electing their internal body leadership, is that it counted here as well?
That's addressed in the union contract.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect.
With regard to the statement of potential disciplinary action, it has been this board's practice, and certainly can change it as you deem necessary and appropriate, but it's been this board's practice not to put the specific penalties for violation of any policy in a particular policy unless we're going to do it for all policies. So all city schools employees are required to comply with all board policies, regardless of the subject matter. And the failure to do so may very well result in the implementation of disciplinary action by the Department of Labor Relations.
I think if I'm not overstepping Ms. Duncan Evans' point, though, I think she's talking about students. And consequences to students. So are you also truant? Are you also, when you come back and say, well, I was being politically active, now you're insubordinate? And so is there a way that consequences to this are limited to this action, or or something? I don't know.
We can look at the student code of conduct.
Yeah, I mean, and I agree that we don't want to box ourselves
Right.
in, but we also want to protect kids a little bit so that they can explore this a little.
It is a balance.
Yes, that's probably the best way to say it. Okay. All right. Any other final questions? All right. Well, thank you again for the super heavy load in prepping for this one. Our next meeting will be 5/16, so May 16th, 3:30 in this room. We'll be discussing GBN, which is the appointment assignment, which is a conversion of a board rule. JICK, which is bullying, harassment, and intimidation, and absences and leave of absences, which is also a conversion of a board rule. If you would like to sign up for public comment, that is available, again, the Thursday through Monday prior to the policy meeting by either emailing the board office, board@bcps.k12.md.us, or calling the board office and requesting to be put on the calendar. Thank you all very much. We are officially adjourned at 4:16 p.m.